Okay, I'm so sorry for all the delays. We're finally going to get going here. So let me go ahead and start with my introduction. We're so pleased. Thanks everybody for coming. And thanks so much for our friends on Zoom for bearing with us. We're here with Antonio Turok, who's this great documentary photographer and photojournalist. He was born in Mexico City in 1955. He's an internationally known documentary photographer and has worked in Central America, Mexico, and the United States for the last 50 years, covering the human condition of the people of Mexico. Mr. Turok is a recipient of the following grants, a long list: National Institute of Fine Arts, Maine Photographic Workshop Book Award, 1994 Mother Jones International Fund for Documentary Photography Award, John Simon Guggenheim Foundation and the USA Mexico Fund for Cultural Rockefeller Vancomer Award, and the Fonca National System Award for Artists in Mexico. By the way, that Guggenheim Fellow, that is one of the most prestigious grants any artist can receive, as well as scholars. So that is one of those ones that people die for. So the fact that he received this is just a truly spectacular achievement. He has published 2 books, Images to Nicaragua in 1988, and Chiapas, End of Silence from Aperture. And the third one, oh my God, we got to update your bio.
I know.
His work has been collected by numerous museums in Mexico, Europe, and the United States. For instance, the Los Angeles County Museum of Fine Arts, the Museum of Mexican Arts in Chicago, Wittliff Gallery of Mexican and Southwestern Photography, San Marcos, Texas, and many more. Mr. Turok lives and teaches in Oaxaca, Mexico, and he continues to document the human drama that surrounds us. Please give a warm welcome to Antonio Turok.
Click on a little kid.
Do what?
Yeah, click on a little. I want to confirm what the audio settings are. Go to video settings.
Okay,
Okay. And click on audio.
okay,
Change that
okay,
to that one.
okay. Thank goodness we have Adrian here.
Microphone
Okay,
to USB audio codec.
okay.
Perfect. It's really good now.
Terrific. And then let's go to his PowerPoint. Sorry, I thought I was ready, but I guess I'm not. Sorry.
I'm already thirsty and I haven't started talking yet. How many of you speak Spanish? Who is it? Again, is it a
You
majority?
can close this
or
window out now.
50-50?
That way you have more room. So then whichever one it is.
So, ¿me la he hecho en español para que sufra? No,
I
¿verdad?
go to Zoom,
I'll say it in English, or I'll try.
Mhm.
If I get stuck,
but it won't let you see Zoom.
you're gonna have to help
have to put it
me
in percent.
translate, okay?
Yeah,
Because sometimes
that's
I
already
get
Yes, perfect. So
stuck.
now let's go to Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, we know. That's what I'm trying to get them to do.
Okay.
Right now. So we need to go to Zoom so they can see at home. Otherwise, they can't see the presentation.
Yeah, and can we see the people that are,
It's not
well,
one.
in other ones, I've been able to see.
There's
them.
Zoom.
Zoom. So
Oh, there we
in
are.
the Zoom meeting itself. So hover till we get the menu on Zoom.
What are we doing?
But there's no way so that we can see them in small and like, because that guy.
Okay, because we got to share screen, of
We have to
course.
share screen.
Yes. Thank you. And share sound.
Again, me?
Which password do they want? Oh, okay.
You know, you're the savior. I have to say it, but I hate it, right? Because what's gonna happen if we're gone and you don't know the passwords to all of this?
Okay.
Have you thought about
Try
that?
typing your password in now.
I mean, I feel sorry for you because the world will collapse if you don't have the password. So this is fun because I'll just go
It
back
says check my
to
audio
my
devices.
analog cameras, right? And I won't care if the digital ones work or
So
don't
you're
work.
recording this, but you want to record the
You
audio
think
as well.
you think
So
that'll be enough? Or I won't be able to even print my. You think we're stuck with digital
Okay.
format? No? We could actually
Okay.
be photographers without the digital format?
Okay, he's in the PowerPoint.
So now Zoom people are looking
Okay, very good.
Click up here to go slideshow.
What do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying.
PowerPoint start the
Well,
slideshow.
Got it. Okay.
yeah, I mean, I just finished going back to the darkroom, and I actually produced a portfolio of my 9/11, because I happened to be in New York City on 9/11. And I decided to go back to the darkroom because I wanted to do a platinum palladium. I don't know if anyone here knows what platinum palladium is. These are like amazing, probably the most beautiful prints in photography are platinum palladium. It's like, not only are they beautiful because they're one of a kind, you have to mix your chemicals and you have to emulsify the paper, but you know, no two prints are alike, even though you try to do them as a series. You know, how you emulsify it is going to change the way it looks. If there's a change of light, and the result is going to change. But you can actually print those with the sun. It's actually part of the sun printing. Have you had any experience with sun printing? Come on, Tomas, you're got to give them homework. Yeah, because you know the digital thing is, look, if we don't have Adrian, we're stuck. So we need the sun. Yes, that is really cool. I mean, there's all these old techniques that can be rescued, and we can get an image, because what we do know now what to do with these different processes, how to fix it. Because just think about it. I mean, photography is only like what, 1826. Well, it's almost going to be 18, 19, 20, 20. Like 200 years, right? 20 and what? 5 years is going to be 200 years. And why is photography so unique? I mean, even though we think of photography, I mean, photography has been happening for hundreds of years. And the first ones to use the idea of a lens to reproduce were the Arabs back in the 13th century. And so they had what was called a camera obscura. And they'd put a lens, and of course, they didn't have the technology of a prism system, but then they would trace it. So we've had the curiosity of using the lens as a form of reproduction, but we didn't have the knowledge or the ability to fix that that image until roughly 1826, right, with the French Nipsey. So from there, we developed a lot of different, I mean, you can print with salt. I mean, you can print with a lot of things. The whole idea is, how do you fix it? So, yes, it's you know, I just think that it's just so wonderful, you know, that we're able to do that as photographers, and we don't need the digital necessarily. But I did use digital to produce these internegatives for the portfolio. So basically what I did was I photographed the images in New York City with a horseman. I don't know if you understand what a horseman is. A panoramic, which is 6 by 12. It's a half of 4 by 5. And you can actually I didn't need a tripod. And, you know, I went around shooting 9/11 with this amazing camera. And these huge negatives are just gorgeous. So I took that and I scanned it. And then I printed it up digitally on a piece of Pictorico. Has anybody gone that far in the class? No? So you can produce your negatives digitally, And so you do all the corrections on the computer, which is really kind of fascinating. Because before, the first platinum prints I did were with my master teacher, who's probably one of the pioneers of world photography. His name was Manuel Alvarez Bravo. I don't know if anybody relates to him, as he's in the history books as being one of the pioneers of photography. And he taught a few of us, like 4 or 5 Mexican, how to do platinum palladium prints. But back then we used film to do the internegative. So they were never quite as beautiful as they are now. So on the one hand, yes, you can do it without digital support, but the truth is that the digital support has given us a much broader gamma of tones that didn't exist just 20 years ago. So yes, I mean, it's fascinating, this whole technological world that we're confronting. And yes, I mostly use my digital camera now, even though when I have something I really want to go out and photograph, I go back to film. There's just something so terribly attractive about film. You know, you just don't get the same quality, even though these things are amazing and simple. They simplify your life. But when it comes down to really going deeper into your appreciation of an object, you cannot beat a photograph that has been processed and produced with film. So that said, that was too long, wasn't it? So what I want to do an experiment with you young kids, which I find fantastic. I want you to kind of just relax for, it's going to feel like it's a half hour, but it's really going to be like 6 minutes. And I want you to just to see these photographs. And these photographs are going to have a span of time of 48 years. Okay, the first photograph you're going to see here goes back 48 years, which is kind of fascinating. You know, this is where photography really becomes different to any other medium. You know, because there's no other art form that has that relationship with memory and time. So let's get started and just relax, use your visual intelligence, try to scrape out all that rational, nonsense that, schools try to put in your brain, They think that everything that has to have a reason. Well, not really. The arts all of the arts, literature, I mean, all of the arts have something which is spontaneity. And that spontaneity becomes magical, and it becomes, something that you never really understand how you got there, but it happened. And that's what art, and that's why art is so different from everything else that you're going to confront in your lifetime. So just relax, close your eyes, and let's get going. You can laugh if you want. I bet you none of you knew that there were elephants. Okay. Okay, so let's get started. Who wants to use their visual intelligence and tell me which image got stuck in your memory and say, what happened in this image? I want to know more about it. Who wants to start?
The one with the jaguar skin. I think that was the one in Chiapas.
The leopard, I mean the jaguar?
Yeah, they peeled the jaguar skin.
Okay.
Family.
So while I find this one, I just want to make a comment. This PowerPoint was developed for universities here in in California because of Hispanic Identity Month. No, it's the month of Hispanic. So they asked me to put this. They asked me to put this. This one, right?
Yeah.
So they asked me to please put something together that had to do with, this date. So of course I tried. All right, this is just a really small part of the entire bulk of my work, and I tried downloading another one, but that's why we got started late, and I asked for an apology. We just couldn't download it from the iCloud, and that's where it all started. What do you think about the digital? Because I get very frustrated. But this is what this particular presentation is about: Latino identity, and what I want to teach through these images to all of you is a culture that forgets its history is a culture that is destined to disappear. And so what I really want you to pay attention to as young kids is to have a broad understanding and feel proud of the heritage of where you come from. And it doesn't matter if you're Hispanic or if you're Afro-American or if you're Asian, each one has a history of its own. And you should be proud of it and you should defend it. And I think this is what I'm trying to accomplish through these images, right? I want you to feel proud of where you come from, even though maybe some of this is depressing. Maybe your parents left Latin America or left Mexico because poverty was, just so deep that they left and came to America to find a better opportunity. So this one here is a photograph that was during the civil war that was happening in Guatemala, where there was a general, his name was Rios Montt, and he is considered, he should have been taken to the Hague court and processed for crimes of lesser humanity. He's responsible for 300,000 people being killed in Guatemala. And so all these people began fleeing and coming to Mexico. In between 1980 and 1982, when this general was in power, and so I spent a good amount of my time going to the border, and they all crossed through these little bridges. It's amazing. There was no real borders, and not only was there not real borders, they all belong to the big nation of the Maya. The Maya goes from Chiapas, Guatemala, and extends partly to El Salvador and Honduras. That was and the Campeche and Yucatan. That was the big nation of the Maya, and the Maya people are amazing. It's an amazing culture because they really developed algebra way before the Egyptians came with their ideas. And we're talking about the Mayas knowing that there was 365 days in a year. They knew that there was 260 days in a lunar calendar. They still use, which is quite amazing, they still use their agricultural calendar in today's day and age to farm. So it's to no surprise that this revolution or this revolt that happened in Chiapas in 1994 is not really just a revolt that just happened overnight. I mean, it took 20 to 30 years. It's a series of situations that took place for the eventual, uprising in Chiapas. And here is just this tiny little bridge that separates a geographic border, but not a cultural border. This is it's actually quite a sad picture because, why there's not that many jaguars left. But this man went off with his 2 dogs, and wanted to eat. And poor jaguar found his poor destiny it's always so difficult, as a photographer, because, you really, you want to hope that your images talk about certain issues. Like, I want to talk about global warming, and I want to talk about, ecology, and just the injustice of, this poor jaguar should not have died. But yet, the human part, the empathy of this photograph is that the family had to eat. So these dilemmas that are going on in your, when you're taking the photograph, is what makes it an iconic image. It's those that have that ability to transport you into 2 different dimensions, and this is one of them. It's so. I wish that we didn't have to have this kind of image, but I also understand that you have to eat. Who else wants to talk about it now that you got started? Okay.
The photo of the little girl that was being buried.
Okay, this little girl was a couple of hours before she had to be buried. It's the same little girl. But what's interesting, the reason I keep on showing this image, it's not because it's actually a depressing image, but it had its moment, and it was a very important moment. And that was that I had this show about refugees coming across in the early 80s. And I remember that somebody at the show or during that period said, God, I feel sorry for those poor Africans. And I said, that can't be. And so it played a real important part to bring awareness to the United States that this was happening in the backyards of the United States, the United States of America. And it worked. People had to confront that reality. It's like today, if we go down to the border, not far from here, you will notice that there's literally hundreds of thousands of Haitians trying to cross the border. Africans, people from Africa. That's why I was hoping to show you what I'm working on. It's incredible to go and find people who've done the whole journey from Africa and they're on the border between, Mexico and the United States. And why are these African people, made that effort, that sacrifice to come all the way to America? what's happening in their countries. I mean, it has to be something horrible, no, to make that sacrifice. But we'll leave that for another moment. But yes, we are living terrible times. I mean, we keep on postponing understanding the severity of what's happening to us, our relationship of the human being with nature. And so all the beginning part of my talk is the years that I formed as a photographer, okay? Why I began to go to the indigenous communities. And one of the most compelling reason was that I discovered something in me as a young 17-year-old kid, that there was a different culture that was so generous. I mean, they didn't speak Spanish, and I didn't speak their language. And I would show up, and I remember in one occasion, I showed up at a little town that it took me 14 hours to walk to. And all of a sudden, I saw all the women grab their children and run into their huts. And the person I was walking with, who was from that town, I said, well, why are these women so scared? Because they've never, ever seen a white man, and even less a camera, in their entire life. And they thought that maybe you were here to steal the babies and turn them into soap. I mean, this is only 45 years ago, you know. And, there's still people that live up in the mountains. I'm sure that there's people here in the United States, you know, I'm sure if you go to the Appalachians, you will find people that don't know about computers. And, you know, you'd wonder, how could that be? Well, it can be. I mean, just think about how many people on the planet have no access to electricity. I'm sure Africa's got, you know, hundreds of, you know, little towns without electricity, hundreds of towns that don't know what's happening. I mean, we're so lucky. I mean, we are so fortunate because we have internet and we have, you know, access to information. We know what's happening, you know, within 5 minutes. If something, you know, dramatic happened, we would know in 5 minutes. And yet, more than 40 or 50 or 60% of the world does not know the world could come to an end, and they would never know why it came to an end. So this is why photography plays such an important role. It's the challenge of getting and communicating. Use photography as a weapon of communication. There is a wonderful, has anybody ever seen that one book called The Family of Man? Ooh, yeah. It was 1950s, and it was by an American photographer called Edward Steichen. Has anybody heard of Edward Steichen? Somebody should write that down. Because Edward Steichen was one of America's brilliant photographers. I mean, he did so much for photography. And one of his last projects was to invite photographers from around the world. And he did this one major show called The Family of Man. And it traveled throughout the world. And to me, that was one of my great books. It taught me just how wonderful and what a joy it is, you know, to be able to be tolerant of other cultures and be tolerant of different ways of seeing the world. And so one of the images or one of the stories that comes out of The Family of Man is when it was in Guatemala. And so many indigenous people, came down from the mountains and, these long lines, there's all this stuff, just to see and be aware for the first time that the world was round, that there were people of all kinds of social class, all kinds of, skin color, all kinds of, different ways of looking at life. And that to me is where I truly understood the power of the image. This is probably one of the first image that made me want to become a photographer. That's why I kind of start with this one, because does anybody want to try and tell me what you think is happening in this image? Come on, somebody can.
I think she's responding positively to your presence, as though she had been isolated and not been exposed to or been greeted by anyone for a long time. Look like she's been sitting, I don't know, near a wall or ravine or something.
Well, what's
And-
amazing is that her face is covered in mud.
Yes,
She's hiding.
she's hiding, yes,
She's hiding from something terrible that's happened to her.
yeah.
It's a way of. Well, the drama of this woman was that she came from a prominent indigenous family, and during the fiesta, the husband died. And when indigenous people do a festivity, it's the whole community participates. It's a communal responsibility. So, and this is real expensive because her husband had to basically take on the responsibility of paying that year for everything that it takes for a community to have a festivity. And when he dies, she has to take the responsibility, the economic responsibility. Well, obviously, I mean, she wasn't going to be able to, pay it. But what the community does is that they immediately consider her a saint. So she's given the saintlyhood of being a martyr. And so she has to pay her debt by, taking care of the church. And she also has to, they give her a little place in the marketplace so she could sell something and give her a chance to have a decent life. Well, she had to walk back and forth every day from her community to San Cristobal, which was a mestizo community. And in the process, she got raped by a few young kids from the town. And the baby was born, and the baby was white. It was not Indian looking. So the nuns of the town said that baby was a baby of the devil, and they ripped it away from her. And so she would come, she'd go around the town just telling us, every day reminding us, and she'd put mud on her face and remind us of what had happened. It was like a slap in the face, it was like, wow, this is powerful. And so it's also a reminder of the wrath of Mother Nature. I mean, there's just something, you look at her eyes and they're so sweet, they're so full of hope, and yet everything else, you're right, you can sense something very heavy happening in that image. So when I took this image, then all of a sudden I knew that you could tell stories that were not, folklore. This is not something that You know, that I could perceive reality in a different way. And to me, this is why it's such an important image. This one here is actually, I think, the oldest image here. This is 1973. This is almost, this is 48 years ago. And it's just hard to think that I'm still standing here, I mean, and yet it's this clash, right, of old with new. What are the Coca-Cola bottles doing there? And why is there Coca-Cola bottles, and why are there Pepsi bottles, and why are they Fantas? And what's going on? I mean, it's like full of contradictions. I mean, and what's fascinating about photography is that you don't have to say the whole story, okay? You have to leave a sense of mystery, a sense of something that you can always rediscover. That to me are the joy of photography, not when it's all laid out. Maybe that's why journalistic photography sometimes becomes boring, because it's just recording, and so my teacher, Alvarez Bravo, taught us something that's real important. And he said, you have to be educated. The more you read, more will show up in your photographs. So he made us read, 3 books. He made us read El Quijote de la Mancha. He made us read Ulysses by James Joyce. And he made us read another French book. But he made us read. He made us study modern painting. He said, Picasso, if we don't understand what's happening with Picasso, we can't understand what's happening with photography. And he was always forcing us to read. He says, if at the end of your career, your life as an artist, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 images transcend history, consider yourself a fortunate human being. He says, everything else is just a repetition. So don't feel that you have to be necessarily original. Just be yourself. Read, find where your influences are coming from. Enjoy what other people share with you. I mean, I'm having a great time trying to share with you ideas. There's nothing new about my photographs. They're not meant, they're meant to share just how beautiful life is, and you should respect that, and you should live for that. You should live and be grateful. I mean, to learn. I mean, a lot of these photographs can happen only because I spend a lot of time with them. Okay, this is another aspect of what the life of a photographer is, who does this kind of imagery, and that is you have to talk to the people that you're photographing. You have to get their confidence. You can't just come into these communities, with a camera. They just simply will not let you in. So you've got to create a dialogue. You got to let them respect you, and you have to respect them. And many times I couldn't pull my camera out. I had to learn to put on, one of these bags and go cut corn with them. Go and drink with them. Learn their language. And so, and now what do we? Why is this image so important for me? today, this one in particular. Because these are the people that are fighting against companies like Monsanto, who are really part of the great challenge you kids have in global warming. Because Monsanto, what they're doing is they're genetically modifying food. And what's happening with that process of genetically modifying food is that we're losing the native intelligence of seeds. I mean, corn has 15,000 years of genetic information. So one little grain of corn has all that information already embedded in it. It doesn't lose it. It's there, and it knows how to survive when there's bad weather, and then when it floods, and when it's this, and when it's that, and it's all there. But when you genetically modify it, you've broken that link of genetic intelligence. And so already, for instance, the world had 88 native varieties of corn. 8 of them have already vanished. We have no memory of it anymore because Monsanto stole the seed, put it in their laboratories. They got some kind of a illness, that variety, and it totally destroyed. And that's where we have to stand up and say, hey, we got to stop this. I mean, it's okay to take a nice photograph, but sometimes it's also important to say, can this photograph do something more than just be a photograph? Can it actually help us in the future? And so, yes, this is the struggle of peasants who know the great danger because they're always studying what's happening. The bees, if there were no bees on the planet, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here talking. And you know why, right? I mean, bees are the pollinizers. And what did the Secretary of Agriculture of this country? There's a great struggle going on where at the legislative level of this, saying you got to stop, you got to close down Monsanto because the bees are dying by the millions. I don't know if everybody heard about that. And I mean, and we know it scientifically, we know it. We know that Monsanto has to be closed down or we're up against the extinction of the human beings. And I don't think that's fair. Why should we allow just a couple of greedy people take away the joy of discovering how wonderful things can be? And these are the communities that are up against them. In India, there's Vandana Shiva, and she's recovering all the different varieties of rice. I mean, Monsanto came in and killed, I don't know how many varieties of wonderful wild rice. Now she's gone up against them. And now these people here in Mexico are going up against them. They're saying, we're not going to let you, ruin this. So there's that also this sense of using photography as a tool to express, how you feel about an issue. And I got a little bit lost, but what Don Manuel, just so we know, right? What Don Manuel said was, even if it's something horrible, always try to do it, with using the best composition that you can possibly think of. Always remember that photography is this relationship of light and and shadows and lights. Don't just shoot for the sake of shooting, but study the light. Try to get yourself in a position that will allow you, to see the most. And what's really great about, I call this like street photography, but this is not exactly street photography, but it has a lot of the influence of, for instance, someone like Cartier-Bresson, right, in the history of photography. Because it's the precise moment, it's the momento decisivo, you know, and you have to get it all. You got to get the light, you got to get the movement, you know, you got to make sure that the tree doesn't come out of somebody's head, and you're a juggler, you know, and it's kind of sad that we don't get more credit for that. You know, I always tell people that I do my, you know, my back things before I start taking pictures, because just one minor little thing like this can be the big difference between, for instance, a backlight image, right? How'd you get it so it becomes a perfect silhouette, you know? And it's just maybe just a tiny, and you have to study, you know, you have to practice that. It's all a question of practice. I'll talk about this one because to finish this chapter, see, this is an image taken in 1994 during the Chiapas uprising of the Zapatista movement. And I remember that the Indian authorities of this town came to my house and knocked on the door and said, "Can you please come take photographs of my festivity?" I said, "Oh, yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, thank you." And I was like wondering, well, why are they inviting me? I mean, you know, they're very closed. It's not like anybody just comes in and they say, "Here, come and take photographs." And so I took the photographs, and then they, no, go into the church. Now, I had never in almost 30 years been allowed to take a photograph inside a church. They will not, it's prohibited. And I couldn't understand why they wanted me to take photographs inside the church. I mean, it had never been done, or at least in 50 years that I had been in those villages. So I began taking these images, and I knew that something important for them, having me photograph this church. And, you know, they knew that, they knew the government was going to come back and retake the movement. The Zapatistas had declared themselves autonomous to the federal government. It's, you know, no federal government is ever going to allow, you know, somebody to go autonomous. So they knew that they were going to come back and probably take over violently their communities. And so what they were afraid of was that they would destroy the church, like they had in the past. I mean, if you have a historical knowledge of the Mexican Revolution, you know that one gang would come into a town and the first thing they do is destroy the church. So they thought that this time around, to teach a lesson to the population, that they would destroy the church. So the reason they had invited me was that I do a record of everything, all the objects, how the church was, you know, organized, so that in case the government did that, they would have a visual record of what was inside their church. So here we are again. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I'm the one who was invited, but I'm also really fascinated that these people were thinking about everything. You know, they were thinking about how to protect their patrimony. And, you know, I mean, this is the 1st of January of 1994. And I remember I I was inaugurating a little kind of cultural center in San Cristobal de las Casas, and I never imagined that, you know, that I would go to war again. I had been through all the wars of Central America, and I said, you know, I don't want to ever go back to war, which is a different story, right? But so I all of a sudden, you know, I was inaugurating this cultural center, and I all of a sudden, you know, got in my car and I see these people, these, you know, young indigenous people marching into San Cristobal. And I said, oh my God, there's going to be a revolution here. And so I immediately ran to get my cameras. And I was the very first one to actually photograph this uprising. I mean, San Cristobal, there was 3 photographers, me and another friend. There was 3 of us who had cameras in San Cristobal. 2 of us, one decided to come in the afternoon. The other one, this is a funny story, because I went, you know, around almost 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I went to the house of one of them and I said, hey, Ricardo, wake up, go get your cameras. They've taken over San Cristobal. And he opened up one eye and said to me, it's not my thing. No es mi tema. So that goes for photography, for being a photographer. What is your theme and what is not your theme? Whoops. I mean, I can do this kind of photography because I'm curious about historical imagery. But that doesn't mean that all photography has to be like this. No, I don't want to scare you, you know, thinking that to be a photographer, you got to go to war. No. I'm always asked if I'm scared when you know, these things happen. No, I'm not scared. All right, it's on the contrary. I feel that it's history in front of my eyes, and I always say I've only got a short time. We all only have a short time of life on this planet, so we have to do something with that short period of time. And it has to be meaningful. And so for me, this is a map. This is a map of my period on this planet. And it doesn't matter, once I'm gone, and this will still be an image that will be used historically to define a certain period of Mexican history. And so that's why I take it. Not that I'm afraid. Could he have shot me? I don't think so. But then you never know. I mean, it's a gun, and it might be loaded with bullets. But then I also thought, this man, what he's trying to tell me is that he no longer will keep silent. He wants the rest of the world to know that when he says, ya basta, we've had enough. And that brings a whole new perspective to why a society decides to go to war. I mean, it's not simple. It's not a simple matter to see a whole society stand up and say, we've had enough. We're going to go and sacrifice our lives for a cause. I mean, we've seen forever, I mean, the United States was pretty close last year. But why didn't they go from just being Black Lives Matter to a full-out revolt? And that's what these are the questions I ask. I don't have the answers. But I do perceive that the United States is every day more and more polarized. I can sense it. I can see it. That, you know, there's more division and more deeply divided. And I ask, in each one of these talks I've given this month, I ask the young kids, does everybody believe that there's no global warming? Does anybody in this room believe that it's a hocus joke of, because didn't Trump say that there was no global warming, that he thought that that was an invention of who knows who? Of China. Now, I asked the young kids, because it's up to you. I mean, I'm gone. You're the ones who are going to have to deal with it. Is there global warming? Of course there is. I mean, we've created it. Now we have the tools to repair it. Now, what do we do as human beings to believe that we can repair it and go out and wake up in the morning and say, I have a mission today. I'm going to go. And even if it's just a little grain of salt, of sand, yeah? And say, God, this feels good, And I think this is why I did the kind of photographs I did, because every day I would wake up and say, this makes sense. This is history. So maybe it's your turn now to ask me more questions. Give me a chance to drink some water. So which other photograph?
The last photograph that you showed, I forget what the guy's name was. It seemed like almost it was like a double exposure. Yes, this one.
Okay, Brad Will. Anybody read about Brad Will? He was an American journalist, young journalist, 27 years old, who went down to Oaxaca and fell in love with the process of the revolt. And I remember the night before he died, there would be street blockades. They'd kidnap a bus or a truck, and they'd close off streets. And so there was no traffic. Wherever you got stuck, that was it. You couldn't move between this street and that street, because it was all so well organized that you were stuck wherever that moment. It was like a toque de queda, where from 8 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning, wherever you were, that was it. That's where you had to stay. You couldn't move freely. And I saw him at one of these exactly the night before, and I went up to him because I said, God, I was 27 and I wanted to go to war, and I went to war at 27. Here's my little brother. I was like trying to, be nice, And, he was like, he reminded me probably how I was when I was 27, really cocky, so, who are you? And I'm the real revolutionary here. And I kind of grinned and I said, yeah, that's what it takes to be a journalist, or to go out and want to fight the world. You got to be, you're allowed at 27, to be cocky, but that's what it takes. And of course, unfortunately, the next day, he found his destiny. And what had happened was that there began to be cross fire between the professors, because the Oaxaca, compared to the Chiapas uprising, the Oaxaca really was not a violent. It didn't start with a violent show of using guns. It was basically the concept was that it was going to be a peaceful protest to lead to change. And what the professors wanted was to be respected, and that their contractors, union contracts be respected, and they get paid decently what they were supposed to get paid for. And of course, the Mexican government always said, no, you're just a teacher, So they went up and started to protest, and all of a sudden, the entire town, the whole Oaxaca, joined in. I mean, this is why I say it's kind of fascinating. What are the ingredients that it takes for all of a sudden the spark of an injustice situation can become a manifestation of an entire population? I mean, it could have been that Black Lives Matter could have been the exact spark that was needed, you know? I mean, in 1933, Hitler lost to the Social Democrats. By 1934, Germany was Nazi in its great extent in 1 year. When I was in Nicaragua, there was 179 young kids willing to die in 1978. And by 1979, they had taken over. They had defeated Somoza, the dictator. So these are really fascinating questions. What does it take? And sometimes it's like, you know, you can't understand why things just, a little spark and it spreads. So Brad Will, that day went back and we knew that we had gotten to a blockade. And unfortunately, he had a little camera, a little, video camera, but didn't have a really good telephoto lens. And I don't know what got in his head. And he walked right in the middle of the crossfire so he could photograph both sides. And all of us on this side were screaming at him, hey, get on your, get away from there, you're gonna get shot. And he didn't pay attention and he irresponsibly got killed. And I say irresponsibly because when you study the history of war correspondence, you're supposed to understand that your obligation as a war correspondent is to go in there and tell the story and come out come out alive. Otherwise, how are you going to know what happened and what is the truth behind that battle? And so he was irresponsible because he put himself in that position to be shot. So as a professional journalist, I would say that. But the truth is that the government said that the students and the professors had killed him. And the United States wanted it, because he was an American citizen, wanted to know the truth too, even though George Bush really said, just let's, don't get involved. He's not one of ours. I mean, and so his death is kind of a tragedy, right? But what makes me think that this is a historic image is that there's always something magical. And I'm glad that you asked me about that. Because if you notice, okay, can you see the body that's right down here? Okay, there's the ribs, and then there's a nose, the eyes. Here's a hand, right over here is the hand, and the ribs, and the eyes. And it looks like he's twisting and coming out of and then up there near the eyes, there's like, Is this the double exposure? No. So try to think how that happened. Okay, so this is a morgue. He's on the morgue, right? I mean, I shouldn't tell you because I should let you think that there is something there's always a lucky situation. But I will tell you because this is a photography class. I generally would not reveal why and how it happened. But behind this slab of cement, there was a pile of bodies that were given to students of anatomy so that they could practice on them. And these are people that have died and nobody came to claim. And so they were on a table right behind that. And the morgue had this huge, I mean, we're talking about a window, maybe the size of this thing here. And it was open in such a way that it was reflecting the bodies into my lens. You see, you can actually see, if you look carefully, you see all the way up there? That's a reflection of the window, of the glass, all the way up there. But I mean, I could have never known that that was going to happen. I mean, but it's magic. Got to believe in magic. So which other one?
Well, you already talked about him a little bit, but it was the students protesting, right?
This whole episode here?
Yeah.
Has anybody ever been to Oaxaca City?
I was planning to go, but I can't.
I mean, this is the main street in Oaxaca City. You know, it's like called Alcalá. And this is like crazy because, you know, I mean, this whole battle happened on two streets. You know, and I remember that all of a sudden it started to get, it started here, it started to get dark. And all of a sudden the federal police, you know, as it got darker, decided to move in and they were going to take over, right? So everybody began running, you know, get out of there. But a lot of these young kids didn't, you know. But I remember I hid in the street, and what was happening at the same time, there was a wedding. So, I mean, I could have missed this whole entire episode. So how do you record an event? You know, how should you be mentally, you know, and emotionally to, you know, to go out there and, you know, it's dangerous. I mean, and this is so much fun. I mean, I don't know if, I wouldn't recommend it, but, you know, here you learn to taste all sorts of tear gas, right? I mean, there's the pepper spray and there's a mustard spray and there's a, you know, strawberry Fields Forever spray. And I mean, and what do you do to go to these events? You take your, you know, jacket, your photographer jacket, and you fill it with Coca-Cola. And, you know, every time you know, one of these different, you know, tear gas comes and hits you in the face. Has anybody seen that wonderful cartoon, which is the history of Los Angeles, Roger Rabbit? Who's Afraid of Roger Rabbit? Yeah, everybody, you remember the kid smoking the cigar and his eyes popped out? Well, that's what I remember when some of those tear gas hit me, and, you know. But then you take the Coca-Cola and you know, just, and off you go, you know. And then by this time, you become immune to all this tear gas. I mean, you know, it's kind of sad. But, yeah, I mean, I mean, there were people, there were unfortunately, there were young kids who were killed. There's always that chance. But generally, generally that doesn't happen. Generally, you go to war and most of the time you come out of it. Yesterday I went to the veterans homeless camp. And it's interesting. I mean, I figured, I'm a veteran. I'm pretty damaged in my head. I mean, once you've seen what I've seen, and I was thinking, why am I taking these pictures, Why am I here? Haven't I seen enough in my life? Can't I come here? Maybe I'll get invited here and, to teach, and maybe I'll say, maybe I don't have to, I can put all of this away and come here and teach you, different alternative processes. And, we go and, choose plants and, choose nature. Why do I have to continue to, do this, I mean, this is a crazy one of that moment of the Oaxacan uprising. It was not as nice as it all sounds. The professors were not all so, decent. They also infringed on human rights issues. And anybody who was caught being either a spy or belonging to the police, trying to infiltrate, they literally grab them and drag them around, So who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? And how do you truthfully put that in perspective? Is there a pure truth to going into a conflict and come out with a true answer? I don't think so. I think that it all becomes a sense of being subjective over objective. So is photography a medium of subjectiveness or objectiveness? And I think that to be a good photographer, you have to be subjective. And in this case, yes, I will stand up to my right of protesting anybody who infringes on someone else's human rights. Nobody should be dragged around like that. Or what do you think? Or should I ignore it and this photograph should be not part of the story? Whoever asks me. Should I? But is it? I mean, what if the greater truth of this revolt was to accomplish a mission, which is to get the society to get treated better? Shouldn't I take that image out? Because that talks bad about the movement. Or am I using this to talk about human nature at the very end of the of the spectrum of documentary photography over journalistic? It's an interesting dilemma. I mean, like this one, yes, this one talks good about society. I mean, this woman stood up against the federal police and said, "Get out of my town. We're not a whorehouse." And we've seen this image in other cultures. I mean, we saw it here during the Kent State protest, the women going up with little flowers and putting them into the barrels of the National Guard. And we've seen it in China. The women stand up and say, "Hey, you're going to kill me. I'm a woman." So, these are the iconic images of heroicism, and especially it generally are the women. And it's kind of sad because women aren't given that credit. So in that sense, also, you can have an editorial sense of when you go photograph, you know? This is a challenge to the male-oriented power structures to say, you know, be more careful, you know, and give the women their rights. And I don't dare go much further than that because I'm just a man, you know, and then I got to be careful. But I can't participate, you know, I can't say, wait a minute, this is a possibility, you know. I mean, women have to, you know, defend their own body because it's their body, and they have to defend their own, you know, structure. But that doesn't mean that I have to keep my mouth shut about what I feel about that, about women's rights. I don't know if that makes sense, you know, but at least that's what I'm trying to do, you know. What you know, I mean, this is a little kid, you know, it's a little kid. Shouldn't he be in school instead of, you know, getting Molotov bombs and burning buses? So what does that say? What does that say about a society? It means that these little kids come from a very poor situation, come from poverty, and their only option is, you know, to grab a Molotov bomb and go out to the streets and you know, go fight and go say, you know, we're not happy as young kids. We have no future. But is this the best way to describe that scene? I mean, these are the questions that happen when you're photographing and you want to say the story and you only have one shot, one opportunity to say all of that information. I mean, you know, you have to say it in a visual way. I mean, this poor kid died because during the nighttime when the police were taking over the city, they threw a rubber bullet and it hit him and killed him. I mean, but then I look at this image and I go back into the history of photography and I look at images of the 40s, and it's got that kind of like 40s lookish to it. You know, it's like timeless. There's something really timeless about her look, you know. And so the question is, does it work? Or maybe should this photograph have been done in color? How many of you, now that you've seen all these images, think that a lot of these images would have been benefited by being done in color? Nobody? Or you think they're stronger in black and white? I mean, it's, yeah.
Antonio, if we could ask you, you sort of delve into that. When we were going up on the elevator, he sort of brought up this idea that he's got a project he's working on. I was like, sure, it should be in color, black and white. Could you sort of, from your opinion, and sort of discuss that a little bit about why you would choose one or the other? Or
yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to download that other. Whoops, maybe it already downloaded. Let me see.
This is on my laptop.
Oh, well, but we didn't even try it, did we? No. Okay, sorry. Well, I was just going to show you because. Right before the the pandemic scare began in March of 2020, right? March, the first week of March, we were all like, close up, go to your bunker and wait for the worst. We had no idea what was going to happen. Well, I was in Tijuana 1 week before, and I was photographing Africans who had come from literally 13 different African countries. And I pretty much began to meet up with them in the southern border of Tapachula. And I began, getting to know them, and they began to get to know me, and they gave me their telephones. And then I would call them, and they'd say, hey, we're in Tijuana. And some of them were still wearing, their African colors. The women will wear, these greens and purples. And I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, that color gives them an identity, because not all of and each country uses the colors of their flag or use the colors of their tribe and I wondered, why am I taking away that part of their identity? Maybe I should try putting them together, When the image is worthy, it should be in black and white, and when the image has the color, has something important to say, include it, but it has to have an intention. See, to me, the problem with color photography is that unless you're a real expert on the theory of color, I mean, that's what painters do. I mean, they study the theory of color, for decades. I mean, not every painter really understands how colors work. What does this color next to this color really mean? And so in photography, sometimes it becomes annoying because it's just a lot of noisy color. And so there's no intention. I also see, for instance, I'll go back. Do you remember the little girl who died a few hours later? Well, to me, it would be morbid and almost grotesque had I done that image in color. It would be like, an image about making fun of that death. Whereas in black and white, it makes you reflect. There's something just so powerful about how your mind is, set so that it's more gentle. It becomes something as tragic as that becomes gentle because you're meditating it. You're not being thrown at. I mean, I remember seeing so many. I mean, I grew up on National Geographic, and but some of those images, I used to say, "Gee, what a shame!" It just it doesn't. It's annoying. I mean, the color is actually annoying, but again, I mean, I sometimes do feel that color could play a role in a dialogue, as long as it's quite obvious that color is playing the importance in that image. You use it in an abstract way. Color represents not the human drama, but the cultural drama. Why are these colors out of place that they're not in Africa? They're in the southern border of the United States. So I'm playing with that. Now, most of the time, it doesn't work. I mean, most of the time, it becomes confusing. So I'm still working on it. But intellectually, I think I've come to the realization of what it is that I'm trying to produce. Now, there are some great color photographers. There's Alex Webb that comes out of Magnum Photography. And he really pays attention when he takes his photographs in color. And the color plays, and he knows how to use it so that it really tells the story. So I would recommend, really that if you go to color photography, spend time studying the history of how art has used color, because that will really help you to understand how to make it, a work of art and not just a reproduction. That's, I don't know if that helps.
Antonio, we have the room for 10 more minutes, so if you want to either open it up to questions.
Yeah.
Or...
Let's finish with, yes.
Is there anybody on Zoom who might want to have a question?
Yes, good idea.
I'm more interested in my students.
Okay.
Anybody have questions? Yeah, I think I told everybody to have a question. Thank you.
Where are we?
Rod, sorry.
So with the color topic, I think the black and white works stronger than color. I myself, I don't like using color as much because I feel that when you do use black and white, it gives it a tone of importance, almost this strong emotional type of, image you're trying to get. And, even with this image seen right here, using that black and white is almost like capturing that moment of emotion, of anger, sadness. And when I think of color, it almost makes me think of something that is happy, playful. And yeah, I just think that all the black and white images really do work.
That's great. I mean, yeah. I mean, what's great about black and white photography? For the first time, you pay attention to shadows more so. And what is a shadow? I mean, a shadow is something that's with you every day, and we forget that we have a shadow. So the day you don't see a shadow, that day you'll know you're dead.
Who else? Another question? Thank you.
So how has being a photographer and doing all this traveling either affected or played into your personal life, either in like family or relationships and stuff like that?
Well, I think I'm a lucky man because I personally thought I would never, settle down. And I found the right person, the one who dominated me. Because that's hard. I mean, that was hard. She had to put up with a lot of madness. But we have a daughter. And probably I have to say that thanks to her, I'm still alive. I probably would not be alive had, because you do get pretty damaged, by seeing all these things. And you don't realize, how to take care of yourself as much. So yes, I appreciate very much your question. And I do have to give her credit for me being here. And putting up with, everything that I've done. But it's not easy either, the kind of life I live is, and I think that so many photographers have the same issue, So a lot of the great photographers do not have stable relationships. And it's sad, no? I mean, I remember, does everybody have any knowledge of who Eugene Smith was? The great, really the great American. He's considered worldwide as the father of modern journalism. worked very closely with Life magazine. He did the last story he did is a story in Japan called Minamata, about a small fishing community that was being contaminated by a plastic factory up the river. And so, of course, all that poison, all that mercury poisoning was going into the bay, and people were fishing, and all the kids were starting to show up with, terrible deformations. The reason I'm using him as a reference was because he was just so tormented by it all. I mean, the last photograph of him is, he's only 59 years old. He looks like he's 80. He used to drink, a liter of whiskey, and then he had to take downers to, get off he basically committed suicide at an early age. And of course, no woman could, put up with that, which is really sad, because his photographs have so much humanity in them that you would wonder, why was he so destructive? Why could he not, be nice to his partner? I mean, why is it that here he was trying to tell the rest of the world, about the horrors of what we're, doing to each other, and yet his partner, he couldn't. So that's such a good question. I mean, after all, who cares about photography if you can't be a decent human being? It's truthfully, I would trade being a decent human being over any of the photographs I ever took. It's not always possible.
Nice. Another question? Probably have time for one more.
More just a comment.
Yes.
How do you go? Sorry. Sorry about that. I just wanted to thank you, and I appreciate your. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the awareness of what's going on in Mexico and in Latin America. And the black and white is a story all in itself with your photos. And I see that with the contrast, and you mentioned shadow, and this picture in particular, like how dark that one, I'm pretty sure is an officer, right? Or could be anyone, but this picture right here with that darkness is really deep. And I just appreciate the fact that you go into these situations and you're vulnerable as well as these people are. So it's very channeling, and I appreciate that.
So who would one last, about photography, because this is, I think, what this class is about, or this conversation is really a dialogue, right? And you all somehow or other are related, no, to Tom's class in photography. How many of you want to live from photography? How many think that you're capable of doing this as a profession and living from it? One, maybe two, maybe three, four, five.
There is a Zoom person to say.
Oh, let's see. Come on in.
I think we've got them all muted. Now I can.
Oh, what a shame. Well, no, it's a really, it's hard, okay, to make a living from photography, and more so in today's day and age where magazines, there's no more magazines, that's,
Yeah.
it's, who are you going to sell? Most of the time, you put your things up on the web. Who's going to look at them? The web, the big World Wide Web is so huge that how do people look at your work? You know, not only photography, but I mean, anything you do, I mean, and how is Western world going to survive, you know, where everything is so difficult now? So I mean, I would tend to say that you should all love photography and just do it on your own, you know. Don't question whether you want to live off photography or not. You should carry a camera everywhere you go, even if it's just a cellular, and photograph what comes to your mind as an exercise. Say, wow, you know, this is cool, you know. I don't have to show it to anybody. It's for me. And, you know, I think that that's the future of this medium, of many mediums. I mean, I would ask Juan, what about poets, poetry? I mean, I don't know who's worse off, if a poet or a photographer.
The poet's worse off. And then he and I collaborate, that's.
Right. Now, that's a bad business too. I mean, you know, that's why I always say poetry and photography go hand in hand, because a photographer really is kind of a poet, whereas a filmmaker is more like a novelist. You know, somebody who does a movie has to have different people, and they have to interact, and this one has to all of a sudden, you know, give room to the next one. But in photography, no. I mean, you have one photograph, and it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with the next one. It's the same. A book of poetry can be a book of many things. So yes, photography is very similar to poetry, whereas movies are more closer to in literature. Okay, well, everybody, I guess it's time to say it's 2:01 p.m. What is that? 2 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yeah, it's afternoon.
All right. Okay. What a shame. Okay. And this battery is dead. It's got 30 seconds left. Thank you so much, everybody.
Antonio, it's such a pleasure to hear somebody talk about, you know, his work, who's passionate, who's had a great deal of success, by the way, also. And so when he knows what he's talking about, but that also that he comes from this lineage. When you talk about his teacher, this, you know, Manuel Alvarez Bravo, one of the greatest of the great, I mean, there's many great Mexican photographers, but he was probably one of the greatest.
No, he is. He's a pioneer of world photography.
Yeah. And so the fact that, you know, also that Antonio came directly from that, you know, you can of course also remember that you got to hear Antonio, you know, Turok speak about his work, show you his work, hear about his stories and his ideas and attitudes. It's a great, great, great pleasure. Thank you so much for coming out. Really.
I wish you all the best of luck, kids. The world is all yours. It's up to you. Okay, I just happen to choose photography, but anything you do, if you do it with passion and love, it's going to be a great time on this planet. You know, and it's a short little, when you wake up, all of a sudden, you know, you're on your last lap, you know, and take advantage of it. I mean, really, I mean, you're so lucky. All of you are so lucky. I mean, where I come from, most people haven't finished primary school, and then let alone, you know, they're struggling just to eat every day. You know, so you've got this great, you know, challenge here of having knowledge. Just remember something: look up to the sky every day, and all the answers are up there. And I don't mean God only. I mean everything is, you know, meteorites have all the minerals we need. You know, if we eat up the minerals here, we can look up and try to figure out how to bring them down. You know, and yeah, look up. You know, it's fascinating what it all means, you know, or doesn't mean. It's just being alive, you know, falling in love. Remember, you know, you still have a whole life ahead of you. You got love.